Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
The moon surface is clearly an old CGI graphic with dust particle effects towards the end that were so unrealistic they had to black out the footage upon landing.
This is a simulation rig that was built. This is the command and service module of the Apollo program. And you'll notice that the window here looks out onto a block here, and there's another one here. They're curved. These are the screens onto which the lunar surface was projected as the craft made a simulated approach towards the lunar surface.
Is what we're seeing a mixture of fact and fiction?
It is fact, it is fiction. It's mixed together. It's hard to separate them until you examine it closely.
And speaking of this proof being as clear as the sun, where is the sun? What do we know is fact? The space is deep and dark. The astronauts have no other light source on the moon other than what lights would be equipped on the lunar module. But wait, there is actually a tremendous light source, the sun. Every side of the moon experiences night and day, but the days and nights on the moon are much longer than here on Earth. Of course, NASA had a difficult time figuring out which lighting would be more realistic to the people. If one wants to argue that they landed during the night period, then they are against themselves, because in some images they portray sun lighting the surface. If some want to claim that the sun was out during the mission, they are against themselves, because it doesn't answer the images where it is completely dark, except for the lighting being used to film. At this point, I know it still may be very hard for some of you. The idea that all of this was staged and filmed here on Earth by NASA and the American government can be a difficult thing to take in. Perhaps some of you are sitting there right now and thinking to yourself, how can any of this be enough to prove that they did not go to the moon? How can one prove that the moon landing in 1969 really was filmed on a film set with artificial lights? The proof is definitely in the eye of the beholder. In an image released by NASA, if you look closely and zoom into the face shield of the helmet, you can see one of the more stronger proofs out there today: a film studio light. In fact, it is the same exact studio light that was used by Hollywood on their sets in that time. They had bigger tasks than checking such minute details. Lighting was definitely a huge obstacle for the NASA filming project. It wasn't just their indecision of whether to portray sun lighting on the surface or not, or the negligence in editing, allowing a studio light to reflect off of the face shield of an astronaut, but they really dropped the ball when it came to shadows. Ask anyone in the industry that is a photographer or a graphics artist that works with shadows. It's not easy. Later Apollo mission photographs show a sunlit terrain. Unlike the Apollo 11 photos, they clearly seem to be lit from a spotlight source. The sun should be the only thing lighting the surface and the objects on it. With the only light source being the sun, except for the minimal light equipment they had on the lunar module, all the shadows should have run parallel with each other. Any amateur photographer or graphics animator would confirm this today, but again, in that time, these filming techniques were overlooked by the people. When we look at the images and videos provided by NASA, multiple light sources were clearly being used while filming. Given that all shadows should run parallel with each other due to the light source from the sun, the shadows are falling in different directions. NASA has attempted to blame unlevel landscapes on the moon's surface, but this attempt has been discredited by those experts in the field of photography. How could a slightly unlevel landscape cause such vast differences in shadows? In the images, it shows the shadows from the lunar module and that of the astronaut at completely different angles than the rocks on the moon's surface, which confirms multiple light sources being used. Here is an example of how these shadows interacted with a light source during the filming process.
Now let's look at some more inconsistencies in the shadows present in the Apollo imagery. These variations in shadow length are consistent with moving away from or nearer to a large superlight placed close to the subject. Here again is Apollo 11. This time it's Armstrong and Aldrin standing together. But their two shadows grow to completely different lengths. The nearer one of them moves towards the light source, the longer their shadow becomes. Such an effect has nothing to do with their relative heights and everything to do with moving to and from a superlight. Remember, the landing site was supposed to have been on flat terrain, the Sea of Tranquility. Consider carefully the difference in lengths of these two shadows. To show that this effect is consistent with moving towards or away from an artificial light source, this is how an artificial superlight might have been assembled, comprising a large number of individual light panels creating a single ultra-powerful source.
These are clear inconsistencies, but what other shadow issues did the director and the studio overlook?
The Apollo 11 photographs have a ton of inconsistencies, not the least of which is this spotlight effect we can see here. If you play with the brightness a little bit, it accentuates the fact that the guy is standing in a circle of light. In more than one photograph.
So those in charge of directing this massive film project were not experts in lighting and in shadows, especially when it comes to space. How could they be? No man had been in space till that time. And this project definitely seemed rushed, as the Americans knew the Russians were on the doorstep of sending a real man into space. But the cold hard fact is that the director of the film and those overseeing the editing project forgot such minor details, and the truth is in the details. One of the most famous rocks in all the world these days is known as the Sea Rock. And we are not talking about a rock from the sea, but a rock which literally has the letter C written on it. Those defending NASA have tried to say that there was a hair or a fiber on the print when the film was made. But looking at the picture even closer, it is clearly marked with a letter C. And it is known in the film industry that large studio sets are filled with props, all marked with letters and numbers, and it has become clear that these rocks were marked for a reason, to lay out in the most natural design as possible. The carelessness of those involved resulted in the side of the rock with the letter C being face up. One of the first pieces of evidence to come forward that the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landing was a hoax was the well-known scene of the astronauts piercing the moon with the American flag.
Really is.
Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway decent?
Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar surface.
There is one big problem though with this scene. There is no wind on the moon.
If there's no air or wind on the moon, why is this American flag waving?
The fact that the flag flaps on the moon where there's no atmosphere means that there must have been a little blast of wind where they shot this.
Could these questionable images simply be the result of the astronauts struggling to plant the flag in the lunar surface? Or is there more going on than meets the eye?
And with NASA's own statement of the flag waving when Armstrong pushed it into the ground is not consistent with its many movements and its ripple effect. The flag waved due to a gust of air, either artificially or from an outside source. Because if we were to believe that the flag rippled due to force, then what explains the flag waving back and forth and even upwards while attempting to place the flag in the ground? One thing is for sure, gravity definitely played a key factor in this film. It had to, it took place in space. How could the filmmaker in that time, with little advancements in graphics and in editing, such as all the software and programs that are present today, give the effect of gravity on the moon? And does it provide yet even more evidence that the landing was faked? The answer, quite simply, yes. The editors simply slowed down the footage to 50%. If anyone were to insert the Apollo 11 footage in an editing program and speed the clip up, you can see that the actors are moving normally, with no effects from any gravity. But how could they produce the effect of being lifted up and being weightless? Well, how do they create that effect in movies today? Cables. And might I say, they do a much better job today in hiding the cables. This by far is one of the most clear and condemning proofs. Cables can be seen in both the Apollo 14, 16, and Apollo 17 footages. Proof that cables were being used can be confirmed when you slow down the footage frame by frame. You will see a light ping that reaches to the top of the screen. On the Apollo 14 mission, it happens 3 times. The Apollo 17 mission couldn't be more clear. You can physically see the cable. And on the Apollo 16 footage, you can see the astronaut being lifted up by a cable before his fellow astronaut could assist him. Those who have analyzed the video footages and the images have done their work indeed, and one of the most talked about proofs over the last few years is the countless images that have cross markings in the photographs. But what could this mean?